Hello, and welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter, the host of this channel, and today we're going to continue our series on this channel. This series is called Why is the Black Ponderer called the Black Ponderer? Black, B-L-A-C-K. What's up with that? Why can't you just call yourself the Ponderer or the Thinker or the Philosopher? Why you got to add this black into your title? Right, and you get, every so often we get the comments that come in that people get perturbed, like, why are you adding this distraction? Right, philosophy, because this is a philosophy channel, and people will say like, oh, philosophy is outside the realm, of racial identity, it's beyond the scope of that, and not just racial identity, it's beyond the scope of social justice or sociology in general, or even politics. Like, philosophy is not about that, even though there's a significant branch in philosophy called political philosophy. Karl Marx, Engels, Rousseau, Thomas Hobbes, right? Even Aristotle, I think, came out with a work called Politics, did he not? And then Plato came out with The Republic, which is a philosophical classic that talks deeply about politics. So yeah, we go there because I feel that it is important. And we're going to do that today. We're going to go there today via a discussion of this text. Right? It is called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. First thing I want to do is just comment on my love for this author. This author wrote another book, one of my favorite books of all time, actually. It is called The Warmth of Other Suns. I gotta show it to you, by Isabel Wilkerson. This author, she comes out with some dimes. She's just dropping the excellent works. This is about the epic story of the America's Great Migration. It's about African Americans moving away from Jim Crow laws that were, extremely rampant in southern states of America, trying to go to northern states and western states, trying to escape racism to build a better life for themselves. The problem is they go over there and they encounter a lot of the same racism that they encountered in the South. And what's really good about that work is that it delves into a topic or an entire history that you don't see really in textbooks, and is a huge part of American history. So it's great in that way. And that's something that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about history and how studying history is very important to understanding today, right? And that's what this book Caste is about. So it's very typical in today's world. I'm encountering people on the internet, YouTube comments, people who aren't from America. They're looking at the state of America today, and they're like, what is going on with America? What is up with this country? Like, I didn't think that this country was like this. Like, what is going on? We look at our current president and the things that he's doing, and a lot of foreigners are like, what? Well, how are Americans allowing this to happen? Even the election that just happened, or is resolving as of the uploading of this video, people were surprised. Not only foreigners, but Americans were even kind of shocked. They were like, wow, I didn't know that the results or the determination of who was going to be the next president was going to be that close. It was going to be that close. I did not think that so many Americans would vote in that way. And so what do we talk about here? We're talking about like Black Lives Matter, all these protests that are popping up about social injustice, the horrible management of the pandemic. You think like America is capable of better, but then like currently our country has the highest deaths from COVID of any other country, even though we have all these resources and all this power, just all types of things. And many people are starting to question like, what is going on? How is this happening? They're surprised. Well, really what you need to do is you need to look at history, and you need to look back at the founding of America and how America came to be. And the true ideologies of, America and American power and the social economic dynamics of America throughout its founding to today. Once you begin to study America like truthfully and you look at the ugliness that is America in history, it all starts making a lot more sense why we are currently where we are. And this is what this book brings up, Caste. It really takes an honest look at America. And I think it does a great job describing, okay, why are we in the state that we're currently in? And, you see in the news, and you see people on the internet, they're surprised. They're like, what's going on? But if you really delve into American history, you'll begin to understand that, okay, this makes sense. What's currently happening is along the lines of how America has always been. So let's get going with some quotes from the book. This is how we do things at the Black Ponder. We read quotes from the book and then we add our supplementary commentary here in this video, and we continue that in the discussions with the comments. So in case you got this book and you want to follow along, this is page 4, the second paragraph, the 6th line. Amid talk of Muslim bans, nasty women, border walls, and shithole nations, the author is talking about the language of President Trump. It was common to hear in certain circles the disbelieving cries, "This is not America," or "I don't recognize my country. This is not who we are," except that this was and is our country, and this was and is who we are, whether we have known or recognized it or not. We gotta delve deep and get out of the fantasy that we think America is and realistically study the history of America. And in that way we can understand, okay, this is why this is happening, and finally get out of the rut that we're in. This is page 24. This is the second paragraph. We cannot fully understand the current upheavals or most any turning point in American history without accounting for the human pyramid encrypted into us all, the caste system, and the attempts to defend, uphold, or abolish the hierarchy underlay the American Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement a century later and pervade the politics of 21st century America. Just as DNA is the code of instructions for cell development, caste is the operating system for economic, political, and social interaction in the United States from the time of its gestation. So, we cannot fully understand the upheavals that are happening today without understanding this pyramid of hierarchy that America is structured from. Wilkerson argues that it's a caste system. So what's a caste system? One of the most famous caste systems that we know of today is the caste system that's in India. That's based off of certain interpretations of the Hindu religion. That's what many people think of when they think of caste, or maybe like they think of feudal Europe, caste system where you're born into a certain rank in terms of your family or your class, and you just can't escape it. This is the amount of power you're going to have. You're going to be a peasant or a merchant or a member of royalty, and you're always going to be like that because that's just how we've structured our society. We would like to think that we've gone away from that, particularly America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, right? Where anybody has the opportunity to succeed. You might take a look at American history and understand, that's more of an ideal currently, and that's not actually the reality for many people in this country, and it never was. So let's delve deep into the specifics of the American caste system. I read you page 29. This is the top of the page. The American caste system began in the years after the arrival of the first Africans to Virginia colony in the summer of 1619, as the colony sought to refine the distinctions of who could be enslaved for life and who could not. Over time, colonial laws granted English and Irish indentured servants greater privileges than the Africans who worked alongside them, and the Europeans were fused into a new identity, that of being categorized as white, the polar opposite of black. The historian Kenneth M. Stamp called this assigning of race a caste system which divided those whose appearance enabled them to claim pure Caucasian ancestry from those whose appearance indicated that some or all of their forebears were Negroes. Members of the Caucasian caste, as he called it, believed in white supremacy and maintained a high degree of caste solidarity to secure it. So, as we know, right, America started with slavery as a way of life. And to maintain that system of slavery, in which Africans were captured from Africa and taken to America to basically be objects of instruments for Europeans, there needed to be a way to unify all Europeans from Africans, right, to maintain this system of slavery. So the concept of white as a race and black. I'm white, you're black. This was created to distinguish between indentured servants who are European from African slaves. Like to say like, oh, these aren't the same, right? These aren't the same thing. So in that way, the African slave trade could continue being the system of social economic control that benefited certain people, these colonial Europeans. What's important to understand here is that race is simply the tool, the instrument to carry out this control of social economics, to ensure that certain people have no power, that they remain objects or instruments for other people, to legitimize the dehumanization of certain people, to ensure power for others. And race was used as a way to do this. It was created. So what's important to understand is this creation of race. This is what caste implies. It implies that racism is a mechanism, a construct to control social economics. This is part of the American caste system. Let me continue. This is page 30, and I begin on the second line. To truly understand America, we must open our eyes to the hidden work of a caste system that has gone unnamed, but prevails among us to our collective detriment, to see that we have more in common with each other and with cultures that we might otherwise dismiss, and to summon the courage to consider that therein may lie the answers. So what we're doing is we're studying the history of America, the ugly part, because a huge part of American history is very disturbing and very ugly, and we're going to continue to talk about it because it's important to understand. Actually, my previous video is about Hegel's History of Philosophy, not Philosophy of History. Oh, History of Philosophy. Yeah, and in that work, that's a very good work too, because it talks about what is philosophy? Philosophy is studying history, and to understand where we are today, we must understand where we were before, right? And we have to understand the ideas and the concepts and the ideologies of the past, and understand that what we believe today, what we think is right and true, they come from the foundation of past ideas. So we are taking a Hegelian approach, believe it or not. Why is America where it is today? Let's study the past, and let's study the ideologies and the events that led to America today. So here we are on page 48. This is the last paragraph, which is where I begin. The colonists made decisions that created the caste system long before the arrival of the ancestors of the majority of people who now identify as Americans. The dominant caste controlled all resources, controlled whether, when, and if a black person would eat, sleep, reproduce, or live. The colonists created a caste of people who would by definition be seen as dumb because it was illegal to teach them to read or write, as lazy to justify the bullwhip, as immoral to justify rape and forced breeding, as criminal because the colonists made the natural response to kidnap, floggings, and torture, the human impulse to defend oneself or break free, a crime if one were black. So strap in, I'm gonna read for a little while, okay? This is important, we're talking about history. Thus, each new immigrant, the ancestors of most current-day Americans, walked into a pre-existing hierarchy, a bipolar in construction, arising from slavery and pitting the extremes in human pigmentation at opposite ends. Each new immigrant had to figure out how and where to position themselves in the hierarchy of their adopted new land. Oppressed people from around the world, particularly from Europe, passed through Ellis Island, shed their old selves and often their old names to gain admittance to the powerful dominant majority. Somewhere in the journey, Europeans became something they had never been or needed to be before. They went from being Czech or Hungarian or Polish to white. A political designation that only has meaning when set against something that not white. They would join a new creation, an umbrella category for anyone who entered the New World from Europe. Germans gained acceptance as part of the dominant caste in the 1840s, according to immigration and legal scholar Ian Haney Lopez. The Irish in the 1850s to 1880s, and the Eastern and Southern Europeans in the early 20th century. It was in becoming America that they became white. In Ireland or Italy, Lopez wrote, whatever social or racial identities these people might have possessed, being white wasn't one of them. Serbs and Albanians, Swedes and Russians, Turks and Bulgarians, who might have been at war with one another back in their mother countries, were fused together on the basis not of a shared ethnic culture or language or faith or national origin, but solely on the basis of what they looked like in order to strengthen the dominant caste in the hierarchy. No one was white before he/she came to America, James Baldwin once wrote. So, white is an American concept. You know, the race of white is an American creation. This is important to understand. Now we're on page 50. This is the second paragraph. To gain acceptance, each fresh infusion of immigrants had to enter into a silent, unspoken pact of separating and distancing themselves from the established lower caste. Becoming white meant defining themselves as furthest from its opposite, black. They could establish their new status by observing how the lowest caste was regarded and imitating or one-upping the disdain and contempt, learning the epithets, joining in on violence against them to prove themselves worthy of admittance to the dominant caste. They might have arrived as neutral innocents, but would have been forced to choose sides if they were to survive in their adopted land. Here, they had to learn how to be white. Let me turn to page 52, we're at the top. Americans of today have inherited those distorted rules of engagement, whether or not their families had enslaved people or had even been in the United States. Slavery built the man-made chasm between blacks and whites that forces the middle caste of Asians, Latinos, indigenous people, and new immigrants of African descent to navigate within what began as a bipolar hierarchy. Newcomers learn to vie for the good favor of the dominant caste and to distance themselves from the bottom dwellers, as if everyone were in the grip of an invisible playwright. They learn to conform to the dictates of the ruling caste if they are to prosper in their new land. A shortcut being to contrast themselves with the degraded lower caste, to use them as a historic foil against which to rise in a harsh, every man for himself economy. Now we're on page 53. This is the second to last paragraph. It was in the making of the New World that Europeans became white, Africans black, and everyone else yellow, red, or brown. It was in the making of the New World that humans were set apart on the basis of what they looked like, identified solely in contrast to one another, and ranked to form a caste system based on a new concept called race. It was in the process of ranking that we were all cast into assigned roles to meet the needs of the larger production. None of us are ourselves. So, I gave you a history of the power structure of social economics of America, why America has this kind of dynamic today, this caste system. And you might say to yourself, and many people do in the comments of previous videos where I talk about these kinds of issues, they say like, well, that's the past, right? And yes, that was wrong. That's why we have to ignore race. Like we can't see it anymore. Just don't talk about it. Just pretend it doesn't exist. Ignore it. Don't refer to yourself as a black ponderer. Just say the ponderer. Leave the history as a history and start anew. The problem is this caste system is still in play today. So you have to do something about it. You can't ignore it, right? When you have a problem, you don't ignore it. You call it out. You diagnose it, right? If you're sick and there's something wrong with you, but you don't know what's wrong with you, you don't ignore what's wrong with you. If you do that, the disease will just get worse. It'll develop further and further, and it'll cause even more damage. By you even ignoring the disease, that benefits the disease, doesn't it? Because it's allowing the disease to prosper by you not doing anything. But if you go to the doctor and say like, you get diagnosed like, oh, okay, you actually have like cancer. Then now you can take steps to actually do something about it, right? You gotta call it for what it is. Likewise, whether I want to say that I'm black or not, I live in a country that is dictated by this caste structure. So either way it goes, my identity as a black person is going to determine what outcomes I have in life because that's the system that I'm currently in, right? And I can ignore it, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. Rather, I choose to call it out and say like, yeah, I have this identity in this country, black, and there's things that happen to me because of my identity. And it's not just because I'm saying that, it's because of the system that I live in and operate under. So let's do something about it. So let's talk more about how that history, this caste system built on racism, how that system affects today. All right, let's continue that discussion. Strap in again because I'm going to read you quite a lot here because I think it's very important. Now this book is like 400 pages, so what I'm reading you is like not even, it's a minuscule fraction of the entire book. But listen to this. This is page 68, and we begin on the second paragraph. What we face in our current day is not the classical racism of our forefathers' era, but a mutation of the software that adjusts to the updated needs of the operating system. In the half-century since civil rights protests forced the United States into making state-sanctioned discrimination illegal, what Americans consider to be racism has shifted, and now the word being race, or racism, is one of the most contentious and misunderstood in American culture. For the dominant caste, the word is radioactive, resented, feared, denied, lobbed back toward anyone who dares to suggest it. Resistance to the word often derails any discussion of the underlying behavior it is meant to describe, thus eroding it of meaning. Social scientists often define racism as the combination of racial bias and systemic power, seeing racism, like sexism, as primarily the action of people or systems with personal or group power over another person or group with less power, as men have power over women, whites over people of color, and the dominant over the subordinate. But over time, racism has often been reduced to a feeling, a character flaw, conflated with prejudice, connected to whether one is a good person or not. It has come to mean overt and declared hatred of a person or group because of the race ascribed to them, a perspective few would ever own up to. While people will admit to or call out sexism or xenophobia or homophobia, people may immediately deflect accusations of racism, saying they don't have a racist bone in their body or the least racist person you could ever meet, and they don't see color. I've counted that in the comment section many times. That their best friend is black, and they may have even convinced themselves on a conscious level of these things. What does racist mean in an era when even extremists won't admit to it? What is the litmus test for racism? What is racist in a society where someone can refuse to rent to people of color, arrest brown immigrants en masse, or display a Confederate flag but not be certified as a racist unless he or she confesses to it or is caught using derogatory signage or slurs? The fixation with smoking out individual racists or sexists can seem a losing battle in which we fool ourselves into thinking we are rooting out injustice by forcing an admission to that A, is not likely to come, B, keeps the focus on a single individual rather than the system that created the individual, and C, gives cover for those who, by aiming at others, can present themselves as noble and bias-free for having pointed the finger first, all of which keeps the hierarchy intact. Oddly enough, the instinctive desire to reject the very idea of current discrimination on the basis of a chemical compound in the skin is an unconscious admission of the absurdity of race as a concept. This is not to say that the consequences of this social construct are not real or that abuses should not be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. It is to say that the word racism may not stand as the only term or the most useful term to describe the phenomena and tensions we experience in our era. Rather than deploying racism as an either-or accusation against an individual, it may be more constructive to focus on derogatory actions that harm a less powerful group rather than on what is commonly seen as an easily deniable, impossible to measure attribute. With no universally agreed upon definition, we might see racism as a continuum rather than an absolute. We might release ourselves of the purity test of whether someone is or is not racist and exchange that mindset for one that sees people as existing on a scale based on the toxins they have absorbed from the polluted and inescapable air of social instruction we receive from childhood. And this is why she uses the word caste, because it's like you talk about racism and people get all defensive. It's like you're attacking a person's character, right? And you no longer are able to have constructive conversations, right? So it's like, okay, we need to like add some more vocabulary in the mix, words that more accurately describe what's happening. Well, let me continue on page 71. This is the second paragraph. In the United States, racism and casteism frequently occur at the same time, or overlap or figure into the same scenario. Casteism is about positioning and restricting those positions vis-a-vis others. What race and its precursor, racism, do extraordinarily well is to confuse and distract from the underlying structural and more powerful Sith Lord of caste. Like the cast on a broken arm, like the cast in a play, a caste system holds everyone in a fixed place. I like how she uses Sith Lord. I put in my notes in the margin, like, okay, Sith Lord with Star Wars, that's the idea I'm getting. So Darth Vader, that's racism, right? But Emperor Palpatine, that's casteism. Okay, Palpatine is pulling the strings of Darth Vader. Anyway, I'll continue. For this reason, many people, including those we might see as good and kind people, could be castes, meaning invested in keeping the hierarchy as it is or content to do nothing to change it, but not racist in the classical sense, not active and openly hateful of this or that group. Actual racists, actual haters, would by definition be castes, as their hatred demands that those they perceive as beneath them know and keep their place in the hierarchy. Yeah, so think about, let me talk again about the election that is finally concluding. And there's a lot of talk right now about, the pollsters got it wrong. They really whiffed, right? They thought the Democrats were going to win in a landslide, but actually it was a lot closer than a lot of the news speculated. And it's kind of hard to accept, isn't it? It's like, wow, that many people wanted to continue the way America is operating right now. They just want to keep it going. Really? No changes at all? But Wilkerson argues like, well, a lot of people really they're invested in keeping the hierarchy as it is, or content to do nothing to change it, right? They're not racist in the classical sense. They're Cassists, right? Which is not an attack on one's personal character per se. Rather, it's just simply an investment in keeping the power that one has and being afraid to lose the power that you have by changing the system. Let me continue. I skipped down 9 lines, okay? It's the autonomic, unconscious, reflexive response to expectations from 1,000 imaging inputs and their neurological societal downloads that affix people to certain roles based upon what they look like and what they historically have been assigned to, or the characteristics and stereotypes by which they have been categorized. No ethnic or racial category is immune to the messaging we all receive about the hierarchy, and thus no one escapes its consequences. Okay, let me skip to 72. This is the 5th to the last line of that page. Its invisibility is what gives it power and longevity. Caste, along with its faithful servant race, okay, Emperor Palpatine, along with his faithful servant Darth Vader, is an X factor in most any American equation, and any answer one might ever come up with to address our current challenges is flawed without it. Yeah, so we need to understand the system and its history that is trapped us in this power dynamic that's hurting us all. We got to talk about it. We got to speak out about it if there's any chance for us to find a solution. Okay, so I'm going to read from page 212, and this is the second paragraph. Modern day caste protocols are less often about overt attacks or conscious hostility and can be dispiritingly hard to fight. They are like the wind, powerful enough to knock you down, but invisible as they go about their work. They are sustained by the muscle memory of relative rank and the expectations of how one interacts with others based on their place in the hierarchy. It's a form of status hypervigilance, the entitlement of the dominant caste to step in and assert itself wherever it chooses, to monitor or dismiss those deemed beneath them as they see fit. It is not about luxury cars and watches, country clubs and private banks, but knowing without thinking that you are one up from another based on rules not set down in paper, but reinforced in most every commercial television show or billboard, from boardrooms to newsrooms to gated subdivisions, to who gets killed first in the first half hour of a movie. This is the blindsiding banality of caste. So we gotta understand it's subconscious. So it's not good enough to just ignore or pretend that it doesn't exist. Well, I should not use the word pretend, because people who are, say they're colorblind or who don't see race, they don't think they're pretending, right? They think they actually don't see color, but they do on a subconscious level because of the programming that we've received the day that we're born, from social cues to media to our daily interactions. Again, it's like a deep-rooted problem that's more deeply rooted than we are consciously aware. That's why it's so important to call it out for what it is and to speak up about it, and not to say like, well, let's just not talk about it. I don't want to deal with it. Then the problem will always persist. So then Wilkerson talks, she has this really powerful scene in the book where she talks about when Hitler would give speeches, right? And one particular time when he gave this speech to huge amounts of people, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people, and he was like the Beatles. He was like a superstar. People were fawning over him, right? And but know what he stood for, right? He stood for hate. He was responsible for the murder of millions of innocent people. How could so many people be fawning over him, right? Could be cheering him on, like so many people, right? But then you got to think about America, right? And the institution of slavery. How Why was it that so many people were accepting of slavery, despite how cruel it was, right? Despite how inhumane it was. Same thing with Jim Crow South, years later. These laws that segregated people based off of race and the hate crimes resulting in that, the lynching, the extreme violence, and many Americans were accepting of that. They're like, well, this is just the way it is. And then you take a step back and you're like, how is that possible? But then you think of today, right? Then you think of what's going on now with immigration and the separations of families and the bans on Muslim people and the racial injustice and these statistics that show like how people of color are killed more by law enforcement than white people. And there's so many people who are like, well, that's just the way it is, or they're not even, or they don't even go that far. They're like, I don't even want to even think about it. I don't even want to think about it. Don't talk to me about that. I don't talk about politics. Right? This is why we have to be careful, because this phenomena, this normalization of dehumanization, this normalization of cruelty, not allowing people their full subjectivity, this acceptance of extreme social injustice, this is a thing that happens, right? And it happened, normal people who are not like, say, monsters, just like average people are susceptible to this, that they fall victim to this. And Wilkerson argues it's because of the caste, the system that we're in, this power structure. So I'm going to read you page 270. I'm going to start you on the fourth paragraph. History has shown that nations and groups will conquer, colonize, enslave, and kill to maintain the illusion of their primacy. Their investment in this illusion gives them as much of a stake in the inferiority of those deemed beneath them as in their own presumed superiority. The survival of the group, social theorist Erich Fromm wrote, depends to some extent on the fact that its members consider its importance as great or greater than that of their own lives, and furthermore, that they believe in the righteousness or even superiority of their group as compared to others. Thus, when under threat, they are willing to sacrifice themselves and their ideals for the survival of the group from which they draw their self-esteem. The social theorist Takamichi Sakurai wrote bluntly, group narcissism leads people to fascism. An extreme form of group narcissism means malignant narcissism, which gives rise to fanatical fascists, politics, and extreme racialism. In modern times, this kind of group narcissism has gripped two nations in particular, according to Fromm. The racial narcissism which existed in Hitler's Germany and which is found in the American South, he wrote in 1964 at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. And I skipped to the last paragraph of 271. The right kind of leader can inspire a symbiotic connection that supplants logic. The susceptible group sees itself in a narcissistic leader, becomes one with the leader, sees his fortune and his fate as their own. The greater the leader, Fromm wrote, the greater the follower. The narcissism of the leader who is convinced of his greatness and who has no doubts is precisely what attracts the narcissism of those who submit to him. Isn't this? Think about what he's saying in 1964 and what's happening currently. A narcissistic leader, supplanting logic, right? People are surprised, like, how is America like this now? What's happening? How is this election so close? What's going on? There's a supplanting of logic so that people are able to maintain the social economic power dynamic to keep the system of control of power intact. And you might say, well, yeah, but this president talks about grabbing women by the genitalia. He's talking about separating children from parents to scare off migrants away. When they ask him, do you condemn white supremacy? He doesn't even give an answer. Like, what? Like, he's constantly lying and saying things that have no factual basis at all. And there are so many people who still are okay with voting for him. Yeah, this is the problem of caste. This is what happens when you live in a society that has a caste system of this nature. This is why it's important today. This is how what we're saying relates to today. This is page 290, and I read you the fourth paragraph. Caste is more than rank. It is a state of mind that holds everyone captive. The dominant imprisoned in an illusion of their own entitlement. The subordinate trapped in the purgatory of someone else's definition of who they are and who they should be. Now I turn to page 380, and this is the last line of this page. Caste is a disease, and none of us is immune. It is as if alcoholism is encoded into the country's DNA and it can never be declared fully cured. It is like a cancer that goes into remission only to return when the immune system of the body politic is weakened. Thus, regardless of who prevails in any given election, the country still labors under the division that a caste system creates, and the fears and resentments of a dominant caste that is too often in opposition to the yearnings of those deemed beneath them. It is a danger to the species and to the planet to have this depth of unexamined grievance and discontent in the most powerful nation in the world. A single election will not solve the problems that we face if we haven't dealt with the structure that created the imbalance to begin with. Okay? Preach. Okay, preach. I continue on page 385. This is the second paragraph, the fourth line. The persistence of caste and race hostility and the defensiveness about anti-black sentiment in particular make it literally unspeakable to many in dominant caste. You cannot solve anything that you do not admit exists, which could be why some people may not want to talk about it. It might get solved. We must make every effort to ensure that the past injustice, violence, and economic discrimination will be made known to the people. Albert Einstein said in an address to the National Urban League, the taboo, the let's not talk about it, must be broken. It must be pointed out time and again that the exclusion of a large part of colored population from active civil rights by the common practices is a slap in the face of the Constitution of the nation. Even Albert Einstein's like, look, I'm a scientist, but dude, we need to talk about this race thing. We really do. But I'm going to go on page 386, and this is the fourth line of the second paragraph. Empathy is commonly viewed as putting yourself in someone else's shoes and imagining how you would feel. That could be seen as a start, but that is little more than role-playing, and it is not enough in the ruptured world we live in. Radical empathy, on the other hand, means putting in the work to educate oneself and to listen with a humble heart to understand another's experience from their perspective, not as we imagine we would feel. Radical empathy is not about you and what you think you would do in a situation you have never been in and perhaps never will. It is a kindred connection from a place of deep knowing that opens your spirit to the pain of another as they perceive it. Okay? Listen. Listening to people. Opening your mind. Okay? Allowing people the chance to talk about their experiences without projecting your own experience onto them. But I skip down to the last line of 386. With our current ruptures, it is not enough to not be racist or sexist. Our times call for being pro-African American, pro-woman, pro-Latino, pro-Asian, pro-Indigenous, pro-humanity in all of its manifestations. In our era, it is not enough to be tolerant. You tolerate mosquitoes in the summer, a rattle in an engine, the gray slush that collects at the crosswalk in winter. You tolerate what you would rather not have to deal with and wish would go away. It is no honor to be tolerated. Every spiritual tradition says love your neighbor as yourself, not tolerate them. I skip down. We're on page 387. This is the fourth paragraph. Human beings across time and continents are more alike than they are different. The central question about human behavior is not why do those people do this or act in that way, now or in ages past, but what is it that human beings do when faced with a given circumstance? None of us choose the circumstances of our birth. We had nothing to do with having been born into privilege or under stigma. We have everything to do with what we do with our God-given talents and how we treat others in our species from this day forward. We are not personally responsible for what people who look like us did centuries ago, but we are responsible for what good or ill we do to people alive with us today. We are, each of us, responsible for every decision we make that hurts or harms another human being. We are responsible for recognizing that what happened in previous generations at the hands of or to people who look like us set the stage for the world we now live in, and that what has gone before us grants us advantages or burdens through no effort or fault of our own. Gains or deficits that others who do not look like us often do not share. We are responsible for our own ignorance, or, with time and open-hearted enlightenment, our own wisdom. We are responsible for ourselves and our own deeds or misdeeds, in our time and in our own space, and will be judged accordingly by succeeding generations. Okay? And this is why I call this channel the Black Ponder. Okay? Not just the Ponderer, the Black Ponder. Because we are living in a caste system. It's true. Isabel Wilkerson knows what's up. And it's time that we address this issue and not just ignore it and not pretend like it's not happening, because it is happening. And it is one of the greatest problems of our time. And we need to talk about it. And to solve this problem, the first step is to admit that it actually exists and to admit that I am black. And to say it loud and proud and say, like, look, I live in a system that treats me a certain way because of the color of my skin. The position that I am in my life is greatly influenced by the color of my skin, whether I want to admit it or not. So I'm saying it right now, and I'm also saying that let's fix this problem. You know, I'm not saying like, oh well, that's just how it is. No, I'm going to talk about it, and we're going to try and reach some solutions. And I think philosophy is a great tool that we can use to address this problem and create some solutions. It's not all going to be philosophy. It's also got to be some action, you know. And I'm talking about activism and communication and sharing of knowledge. But, you know, I believe that there is no such thing as color blindness. No one is colorblind to race, because whether you want to admit it or not, even on a subconscious level, race is an issue that determines your behavior. How do we deal with this? We talk about it. We put it out there, we address it, and we talk about it seriously. And that means talking about it philosophically, on a philosophical level, you know, giving it that level of importance. Well, you've been watching The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.